How do you know what is true? That's a very hard question to ask someone as well. So truth, I would say, is very complicated than someone could initially see. When people don't really think about it, it feels like it's so simple and I just have to read and I understand. But when you really go deep down, truth is very complex.
One tactic in winning the war is using misinformation to break up the morale of your opponent or spreading stories that will create infighting.
And if you look at like India as well, they have this very specific mode of narration. This minority group that belongs to this religion is causing problems. They kind of start creating news that makes people align with it. They keep them in fear. And you can see that most of the world have problems with poverty, lack of jobs, food security, water scarcity, and then there is like catastrophe from climate change happening. People don't want to address that because it's a very hard problem to solve. So the easy way to come into power is creating misinformation about specific groups and blaming them for the problem. So it's a short-term blindness. Today, we are discussing misinformation. Personally, I feel it's getting very hard to know what is true and what is fake in this world. In today's video, we are discussing about how to think about social media, news, and politicians from the view of information. Feel free to watch it till the end and subscribe if you like it. It means a lot to me. So, Joel, how would you define misinformation?
Well, I think I would define it with there is a part in it is by intent, spreading unverified or unverifiable information. Yeah.
And would you give an example on an unverifiable content or information that could be considered misinformation?
Well, let us take war, where this is a big part. One tactic in winning the war is using misinformation to maybe break up the morale of your opponents or spreading stories that will create infighting or things like that.
Exactly. And since there is social media becoming such a big, huge player in handling information, there is all this news from around the world that is passed through Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and people will be reading it and will be thinking like, okay, since someone brought it up, it must be true. But it doesn't have to. Sometimes people just write up what they think is misinformed to, for example, have an upper hand in a situation. So that could definitely be considered misinformation. Personally, where do you consume information?
Well, I try to... Well, actually, I go on Twitter or similar platforms to see what people are talking about.
Okay.
What seems to be trending at the moment. And then I step out of that and try to find different sources. For me, I've started to look a lot at ground news. They collect different sources. So you get an indication of, are you looking too much on only one side of the spectrum? Is it too left or
it's too right? And left and right is basically your views on politics. And that's what Joel was trying to explain. And with ground news, could you explain a little bit about what is ground news? Is it a collection of different news channels combined in a single place? Is it like that?
Yeah, I haven't looked a lot at it yet, but it's this platform where they seem to collect as many news outlets as they can. So newspapers, maybe TV channels and the like, and then people grade them. As in, do you perceive these as left or right? And then in Sweden it would be like, all Swedes perceive this newspaper as more left of center. Whilst you have these few on the maybe right or far right.
Yeah, I think like many people don't actively think about left or right or center. They just like feel like, okay, this is the news from a news medium that they have been reading for a long time, and this must be true. And truth is quite a complex thing to explain, but usually it has to do a lot with who pays that news medium to kind of sustain. So if there is a political donation or like anyone who's rich enough to kind of fund their news campaign, usually they always have this point of view in any kind of content. And when Joel was explaining, that is one of the things you're trying to explain, right?
Yeah. And also depending on which group you would be closer to, like every group has its story that drives its narrative, which will color how they present and what they present. And that's why it's so important to try to spread out your knowledge gathering so that you get more
Perspectives.
from a wider array of stories so that you get a clearer picture of what is actually going on.
Yeah, I'll give another example that came to my mind. Like there is all this crazy immigrant stories going around, and it might be true, it might not be true, but the truth, I would say, comes somewhere in the middle. There is a lot of different problems causing a country to go into a place, but if you only read certain kind of topics, or if you only go into certain kind of social media groups, it would immediately feel like this one single cause is what is causing all these problems. And that is in many ways misinformation as well. A lot of them are not factual based. They are more of like people's point of view on what they think is happening. How do you know what is true? It's a very hard question to ask someone as well.
That's a really hard question. Like you could ask yourself, well, what do you mean by true and so on? But we can know to some certainty some things are true. I think in science they say 90 or 99% or whatever. But we don't want to box ourselves in too much so that we can't walk away from it if it in the future shows to not be this way. But on a lot of things we can be really, really certain that this is true.
I would say, like, for example, if an agency that is made by government to kind of give the number of people who voted in an election, and you trust this agency to give you the right numbers when they put a number out, I would say it is trustable because as a entity, it would be doing its responsibility. So a lot of your trust should be in the system which determines the truth. What is your opinion?
Kind of. I agree. I mean, I would say that even if it would depend on the government and that entity, like how much can I trust? Has it earned my trust? But even if it has, make sure to verify it. Like in the case of voting, it wouldn't be too hard to check. I would think. And if opposing beliefs spring up, like, but there was voter fraud. Okay, but then what's the evidence?
And this comes to a very important point. For example, like if you look at the war between Ukraine or Russia or Israel or Palestine, you can see that, for example, Russia's version of things would be like, oh, this territory has always belonged to Soviet Union, or Israel would be like, according to our religious books, this has always been our place to come back to. Now the question is like, are they telling the truth? What is the entity that is verifying this truth? And then it comes back to the viewer, the person who's listening to this news or reading the news on how do we define truth? Do you believe in the religious books? Is this book enough for you to think that this is truth? Is history books from Russia enough for you to believe this war is kind of fine to be fought? So truth, I would say, is very complicated than someone could initially see. When people don't really think about it, it feels like it's so simple and I just have to read and I understand. But when you really go deep down, truth is very complex. But I would argue everyone to really question what is in front of you and really like go deep into, is this really true? How do you think misinformation influence people?
Well, as it seems, it's much more like enticing. It's juicier. It's like it's more towards trauma. It does pull us in, it seems. They usually come with better stories.
Could you maybe explain, or I could like give an example as well, like better stories as in like the world is flat is a much more crazier, compelling story than the world is round as per all the scientific books. So people...
Yeah, I was thinking more in the line of a lot of people feel oppressed.
Yeah.
Oppressed by whom? Maybe it's just society being structured in a way that puts you in a lower rung in society, which of course you feel oppressed. But then someone comes with a narrative and points to a pair of individual or a shadow society. And now it's more like we're moving into a movie. Now it's interesting, like, yeah, it's them over there in the shadows that are pulling the strings,
Yeah, I understand. It's more like people want to find reasons for why their life is in a certain place, usually, because they feel like, oh, we have worked very hard in our life, and we have done everything that was told to us, like study hard or get a job or whatever. But still, the life that is promised to us is not delivered. So why does this happen? Who should we blame? And then exactly like you might be reading things like, oh, this is this group of extremely rich people somewhere in the US or in Europe controlling the world, and they control the fuel, and that makes everyone kind of slaves, and or some crazy stories on like people controlling the world. And I think it's kind of like, it's more of like people would really like to blame someone for their life, and misinformation is kind of a good tool to help them do that.
Of course, because it makes the burden much easier to just put it on to someone else. And then you can also direct the anger that you feel. Maybe even you feel resentment or something, but you can direct that energy onto something somewhat real.
Yeah, and the crazy part is that misinformation is constantly used by dictators or people who want to have power over crowd. You can see that in Nazi Germany, when people who were close to Hitler or Hitler's propaganda machine kind of said like, okay, all these problems in Germany is caused by this small group of people, and they're called Jews. And they started spreading fake news, back in time, or misinformation. And that caused the whole crazy killing of a specific group. And if you look at like India as well, they have this very specific mode of narration, like this minority group that belongs to this religion is causing problems. And they kind of start creating news that makes people align with it. They keep them in fear using this misinformation. So it's a very strong tool. Do you think, and we already kind of answered that, do you think politicians use misinformation to control people in modern world?
Of course. I mean, I think we use it. I think everyone uses misinformation to an extent to get our will through, even if we're not aware of it. But especially politicians, because they're there for a reason, and they have their like ideal in the future that they want everyone to move towards. So of course they will
do the best they could to make sure people align to them. And you can see that most of the world have problems with poverty, lack of jobs, food security, water scarcity, and then there is like catastrophe from climate change happening. People don't want to address that because it's a very hard problem to solve. So the easy way to come into power is creating misinformation about specific groups and blaming them for the problem. So it's a short-term blindness or cause of why the state of this country is like this. So politicians, me too. I absolutely agree. Politicians use misinformation to control masses. It's been happening before. It's still happening now. How do you think someone can protect themselves from misinformation? How should they think about that?
critically.
Critically?
Of course. No, but you have to verify everything. You have to check everything, because and I feel that it's getting harder and harder to hear when something is off. Make sure for yourself. Don't just trust what people say. Yeah, they come off as conscious when they present this piece of information, but that doesn't really make it any more true. Check it for yourself so that you know that, this is true because of, let's say, these studies or these other things. I know this event happened, I know this and that.
Exactly. I would say confidence of someone in an information doesn't make it true. People could have very high level of confidence because maybe someone they trust, like their parent or their teacher, people they've met at work told them something, and they have so much confidence because they think like, oh, this is a smart person I'm talking to and they believe in this, so that's supposed to be true. But information doesn't work like that. Information works in a way that you need to go and verify the source of where this is originating from. So you need to be always very, very critical on what you're hearing, what you're listening, and always kind of keep in mind that there is larger organizations that's pumping out information to make you think in a certain way, to an extent, not everywhere, but you should always take it with a grain of salt and do your own research, and don't go with what you read online in Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram or any kind of social media generally, because they don't have any kind of responsibility in making sure this information is fact checked. Go with news media who kind of talks openly about where they find the source of the information they have published. I think that is one way to make sure you're safe, at least to an extent. What would you say is the future of information? Thinking that there is deep fakes out there, there is all kinds of warfare based on misinformation. What would you envision the future to be?
I guess it could go both ways. Like you mentioned, deep fakes, and it's not hard to see because it has already started, like creating videos of political opponents doing something that they know the public will shy away from, but at the same time, if it went in a really good direction, because we have a problem to verify what is true and what isn't, if it can help us to see clearer, this is the narrative behind this article. This is the narrative or the story that informs this news outlet or this journalist, and also connect us to alternatives, so that it could at least make it much easier to see a bigger picture. But still, at least in all the futures I can see, we need to do the work. Like every individual has to actually read the article and not like the headline, but also read multiple articles.
It's actually a lot of work, what Joel is saying as well, especially with the generation we have who has a goldfish memory and attention span. I think they're going to struggle a lot in the future, and I'm being like quite open about it. I would say my point of view is that it's going to be even more harder to find what is true and what is not, especially with deepfake and AI. It would be easier to spread this kind of misinformation. A lot of developed countries, like especially Europe, would definitely bring regulations, whereas a lot of other countries, for example, like developing places like India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or whoever, and even like other countries, smaller countries like Vietnam, most of Africa, even developed countries like America, who is very capitalistic, they would take a longer time to bring regulations because their focus is on a whole different place. And that would cost everyone a lot. There would be videos of politicians talking things that they never publicly said, and you would be thinking like, is this true or is it just made up? The only place where I feel safe is with people who work more on a higher moral compass, like good journalists who really want to put the truth out. And there would be people like that, but it would be hard to find. But I hope there would be some level of AI innovation to catch misinformation and fact check in all the websites and whatever information is spreading. And I hope people would actually use it and think more about what is true. My final question is that, would you say world has become more radicalized after social media, after this kind of like blast of information?
No, I wouldn't. The world has become more connected for sure, and radical people find each other as any other interest group find each other, because it is so easy now. I would say the last years we have become more polarized. We have strayed further apart. We can see it very clearly in the US, but I think I see it all across the world, which worries me a bit, because if we can't meet as people, then how can we have our society together and have all the things that is a society functioning?
It's good points. I would say like my point of view on this is, if you think back in time, we have always said that countries have always been in war, and it has not always been about resources, but also about ideologies and point of views. And it makes so much sense now that people have advanced in culture and how they behave in the world, and then they don't go to war on a physical level unless certain specific things happen. But people still have that kind of agitation on other people's views, and this is so easy to find the other point of view online. So people definitely get polarized, and those kind of fights happened online. But I also feel it's healthy to have this kind of discussions and to see that, okay, we are all frogs in a well from our own limitations. And it's for people who want to find more information, want to expand their mind, there is all these tools to use. And people who want to go the other way, there is tools for that as well. I would say we are done with the discussion regarding misinformation, and it was very fun, at least for both of us. At least I can talk about me. It was fun. I hope you guys had a good time listening to us. I see you next time. Till then, have a nice day. Take care. Bye-bye.